Forget the flashy Shelbys everyone remembers. What if the real killer wore a Mach 1 badge? The 1970 Boss 429 looked tame to the untrained eye, yet it carried NASCAR's most feared big block heart. It wasn't just competition, it was an undercover executioner, built to humiliate legends. Top 1, 1970 Mustang Mach 1, Twister Special. Kansas never saw it coming. A tornado on wheels dressed like just another Mach 1 rolled into dealerships under stormy skies. Only a handful were built, sold quietly in the Midwest, and today this Twister Special remains one of the most baffling Shelby killers Ford ever unleashed. From the outside, the Twister looked deceptively familiar. Bright, grabber orange paint screamed muscle, offset by black side stripes, a flat black shaker hood, and Mach 1 trim that screamed showroom appeal. Buyers in 1970 thought they were just buying another regional dealer promotion. In truth, they were taking home a one-off tornado disguised as a Mach 1. Only 96 units were produced, a mix of 48 428 Super Cobra jet drag cars and 48 351 Cleveland-powered versions. Inside, the Twister carried the Mach 1's comfort weave bucket seats, simulated wood grain dash, and optional fold-down rear seats. It was plush enough to pass as a family cruiser, but the badge and engine told another story. Under the shaker hood, the 428 Super Cobra jet cars hid Ford's most fearsome V8, rated at 335 horsepower, but everyone knew the factory numbers were sandbagged. In truth, the SCJ pumped out closer to 400-plus horsepower with 10.61 compression, a Holley 4-barrel carb and drag strip-ready internals. Matched to 4.3 rear gears and Ford's beefed-up drag pack, the Twister could hammer the quarter-mile in the low 13S Shelby territory without the Shelby price tag. What made it a killer wasn't just the power, but that it slipped under the radar. While Shelby's GT500 KR carried prestige and marketing muscle, the Twister was a regional phantom, raw, brutal, and arguably quicker off the line. At the time, many dismissed it as just another flashy dealer gimmick. But decades later, collectors realized they'd overlooked one of the rarest, most potent Mustang variants of the muscle era. Surviving Twisters today fetch well into six figures, sometimes crossing the $200,000 mark at auctions. For a car built as a regional oddball, its legacy now rivals the Shelby name it once stalked in silence. It wasn't just a dealer promo, it was a Shelby killer in plain clothes. But while the Twister was a phantom storm in orange paint, Ford wasn't done experimenting with big block Mustangs that could outgun Shelby's legends. The next car in our lineup traded limited numbers for raw intimidation, a Mustang that needed no disguise to declare war. Top 2, 1970 Mustang Boss 429. It looked like a regular Mustang fastback, subtle stripes, scooped hood, wide stance. But hiding under that sheet metal was a monster built not for the boulevard, but for NASCAR glory. The 1970 Mustang Boss 429 wasn't about looks, it was about intimidation, raw engineering, and bending the rulebook until it screamed. Ford needed a way to homologate its new 429 cubic inch semi-Hemi V8 for NASCAR. The Mustang wasn't the obvious choice, it was too small. Yet Carcraft, Ford's underground skunkworks, took the challenge. They modified the engine bay, shifted components, and shoehorned the Boss 429 into the Mustang's frame. Inside, the car was bare bones compared to Shelby models. Vinyl buckets, standard dash, no frills. On the outside, it looked muscular, but not outrageous, unless you knew what the Boss 429 badge really meant. Despite its race-bred DNA, the Boss 429 was surprisingly underwhelming on paper. Ford officially rated the engine at 375 horsepower, but everyone in the know understood that number was a lie. In truth, the big block semi-Hemi was capable of 500-plus horsepower with proper tuning. The quarter-mile times hovered in the low 14S stock, quicker than most cars on the street, but not as dramatic as you'd expect. Still, collectors realized its rarity. Only 499 units were built in 1970. Today, those same underachieving Mustangs sell for $300,000 to $500,000, and properly tuned versions revealed just how deadly they could have been. The Boss 429 earned a reputation as a factory freak. It wasn't about instant drag strip dominance, it was about unlocking potential. NASCAR fans knew it was a Trojan horse. Shelby devotees saw it as a rival disguised in Ford's plain fastback clothing. For decades, these cars sat undervalued, but now they've ascended into holy grail status. Their combination of limited production, race engine heritage, and understated design makes them untouchable. This was Ford proving that it didn't need Shelby to create something lethal, it just needed to be cunning. The Boss 429 proved you could hide a race engine in plain sight, but Ford wasn't done with disguises. The next Mustang took subtlety even further, packing muscle where no one expected. And it came with a name that sounded almost ordinary until it unleashed all 428 cubic inches of fury. Top 3, 1970 Mustang Mach 1428 Super Cobra Jet, Drag Pack. On the surface, it was just another Mach 1 stripes, shaker hood, magnum wheels, and a splash of 1970 swagger. But ticking the right box on the order form unleashed something far more sinister. The Drag Pack wasn't cosmetic. It was Ford's way of quietly building a street-legal weapon to embarrass anything at the strip. The Mach 1 was already a performance trim, but when equipped with the 428 Super Cobra Jet and the Drag Pack option, it became a factory-built drag racer hiding in broad daylight. Buyers got the heavy-duty oil cooler, beefed-up internals, and the legendary 9-inch rear with 4.3 gears. The interior looked every bit the Mach 1 luxury sport mix. Wood grain dash, high-back buckets, and comfort options. Outside, it screamed muscle, yet few knew what lurked beneath until the light turned green. Ford rated the 428 SCJ at 335 horsepower, but, just like the Boss 429, that number was corporate fiction. In reality, the Drag Pack setup pumped out closer to 400 to 425 horsepower, with torque figures cresting 440 pound-feet. Quarter-mile times landed in the low 13s, depending on gearing and driver skill, lightning quick for 1970. Production was limited, with only about 2,000 to 3,000 Super Cobra Jet Mustangs ever equipped with the Drag Pack, making them elusive finds today. Auction prices can soar past $200,000 when documentation proves authenticity. The Mach 1 428 SCJ was proof that Ford hadn't abandoned its muscle car roots. It was their way of saying, "You want Shelby power without the Shelby price tag? Here's your monster." On the street, it terrorized Camaros and Roadrunners alike, while at the strip it was a certified bracket brawler. Unlike the Boss 429, which needed tuning to shine, the SCJ came ready to punish straight off the showroom floor. It cemented the Mach 1 name as more than just styling, it was performance pedigree carved in asphalt. The Drag Pack Mach 1 may have been the king of stealthy muscle, but Ford's next move proved they weren't just chasing raw numbers. Instead, they engineered a Mustang that balanced finesse with fury, one that carried a Cobra Jet badge, but demanded respect even without the Drag Pack. 12-liter Top 4, 1971 Mustang Mach 1 429 Cobra Jet. 1971 was supposed to be the year the Mustang grew up. Instead, it grew massive. Longer, wider, and heavier than anything before it, the Mach 1 looked more like a muscle-bound cruiser than a quarter-mile killer. But hidden under its stretched hood was Ford's wild card, the 429 Cobra Jet, a big block brute that refused to play nice. The Mach 1 trim was already Ford's sportiest and most aggressive Mustang offering. With its honeycomb grille, twin sport lamps, Anoka hood scoops, and Mach 1 stripes, it looked every bit the street predator. Inside, Ford dressed it up with high-back bucket seats, wood grain accents, and the classic three-spoke sports wheel, making it feel upscale despite its muscle intention. But the real action lived beneath that cavernous hood. Buyers who ordered the 429 Cobra Jet got a 7-liter monster with 370 horsepower, paired with a beefed-up suspension and the option for the Drag Pack that brought a 4.11 Detroit locker rear end. On paper, the 429 Cobra Jet sounded like an answer to the Boss 429, but in reality, it carried its own unique punch. The car tipped the scales at nearly 3,800 pounds, but when drivers launched it properly, it ran low 14-second quarter miles, still blistering for the early 70s. Production numbers tell the story of its scarcity. Only about 3,600 Mach 1s left the factory with the 429 CJ in 1971, making it one of the rarest big-body Mustangs. Today, documented survivors can easily fetch $100,000 to $150,000 at auction, with Drag Pack cars commanding even higher. The Mach 1 429 CJ represented both the best and the beginning of the end for Ford's muscle car era. It carried the brute force of the golden years, but the reality was clear. Emissions, insurance premiums, and the looming fuel crisis were tightening the noose. The size and weight made it less nimble than its predecessors, but for collectors today, that's part of its charm. A big, unapologetic statement that Ford wasn't ready to surrender its crown just yet. But as the muscle era began to collapse, Ford wasn't finished surprising people. If the 429 CJ was the brute force sledgehammer, the next Mustang proved that precision engineering and raw aggression could be fused into a leaner, sharper street weapon, the kind of machine that carried a name still whispered with respect. Top 5 1971 Mustang Boss 351. By 1971, the Mustang had ballooned into a heavyweight. Most thought Ford's glory days of sharp-edged performance were behind them. But then came a curveball, the Boss 351, a car that looked like another bloated pony, but packed the kind of heart that could humble bigger legends. The Boss name carried weight thanks to the Boss 342 and Boss 429, but the Boss 351 was something different. Externally, it wore the Mach 1's long hood and aggressive stance, complete with NASA-style hood scoops, blackout accents, and competition-style stripes. Inside, Ford gave it all the right touches: high-back bucket seats, Hurst shifter, and a rally clock reminding you that this was a serious driver's car, not just another street cruiser. What truly made it special sat under that scooped hood. The 351 Cleveland 4V engine, rated at 330 horsepower but notorious for producing far more in reality. With a solid lifter camshaft, 11-1 compression, and a factory aluminum intake, it was one of the most potent small-block Detroit ever unleashed. Ford paired it with a close-ratio 4-speed manual and a 3.91 traction-lock rear axle, making it as ferocious off the line as it was stable on the highway. In a year dominated by big blocks, the small-block Boss stunned skeptics. Independent tests clocked it at 13.8 seconds in the quarter mile, quicker than many 429 Cobra jets and even rivaling some Mopar Hemis. With only 1,806 units produced, scarcity added to its legend. Today, surviving examples often cross the $125,000 to $75,000 range at auctions, and pristine low-mileage examples can climb higher. The Boss 351 wasn't just quick, it was balanced. While the 429 cars struggled with nose-heavy handling, the smaller Cleveland made the Boss nimble and vicious in ways muscle cars weren't supposed to be by 1971. It proved that Ford engineers could still create a factory freak that slipped under the radar. For enthusiasts, it's the last true Boss Mustang, a one-year-only phenomenon that cemented its reputation as one of the deadliest small blocks of its era. But Ford's experiments with special editions didn't end there. If the Boss 351 was a lean street assassin, the next Mustang was something altogether stranger, a patriotic oddball that looked more like a rolling billboard than a Shelby killer, yet still hid its own punch beneath the stripes. Top 6 1970 Mustang Boss 302. To the casual eye, the 1970 Mustang Boss 302 seemed like another sporty fastback. But under its skin, this machine was Ford's secret assassin, built not for comfort, but to dethrone rivals on the Trans Am circuit and quietly eclipse the Shelby GT350's reputation. Its looks were subtle but purposeful: a blackout hood with optional shaker scoop, side stripes, front chin spoiler, and rear deck wing signaled intent without going overboard. Buyers could pick wild colors like grabber blue or calypso coral, giving the car a street presence equal to its racing bite. Inside, the Boss offered business-like simplicity: high-back vinyl buckets, wood-grain dash accents, and an optional factory tachometer. It wasn't plush, but every detail pointed toward focus behind the wheel. The real story lived under the hood. Ford created the 302 cubic inch small block by combining a Windsor block with Cleveland heads, resulting in a screaming high-revving V8. Officially rated at 290 horsepower, it actually delivered closer to 350 plus when paired with solid lifters and Holley 4-barrel carburation. A close-ratio top-loader 4-speed and traction lock differential made the car lethal off the line. Independent tests showed 0 to 60 miles per hour in 6.5 seconds, quarter mile in the mid-14s, and cornering that stunned European competitors. With quick radio steering and competition suspension, the Boss 302 was no straight-linal brute. It was Ford's precision weapon. Only 7,013 were built in 1970, sealing its legacy as a one-year wonder. Priced at about $3,700, the Boss gave buyers Shelby-level performance for less money. On the track, it brought Ford the Trans Am Championship, proving the Mustang could dominate without Shelby's nameplate. Decades later, surviving cars have become blue-chip collectibles, often breaking six figures at auction. More than just a muscle car, the Boss 302 represented Ford's ability to build a street machine that doubled as a race winner, hidden in plain sight. Yet Ford wasn't done experimenting. If the Boss 302 was the lean assassin, the next chapter came wrapped in red, white, and blue, an unsuspecting package hiding muscle no one expected. Top 7. 1972 Mustang Sprint Edition. In 1972, America was restless. Vietnam politics and patriotism clashing in every headline. Ford seized the moment with a special Mustang draped in red, white, and blue. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a marketing stunt, but the Mustang Sprint Edition carried a hidden sting that made it more than just decoration. The Sprint Edition was offered as hardtop, sports roof, and convertible, each wearing bold, USA-inspired graphics. A white body with blue accent stripes and red pinstriping gave the cars a flag-like presence. Inside, buyers found vinyl bucket seats with unique red, white, and blue inserts, a wood-accented dash, and Rallier cluster gauges. The Sprint also came with hubcaps adorned with color-matched trim rings and optional magnums for those who wanted more attitude. While many dismissed it as a bicentennial gimmick, the Sprint's bones told a different story. Most Sprints left the factory with small block power, but the secret came when buyers checked the right box on the order sheet, the Q-code 351 Cobra Jet V8. This 266 net horsepower engine, closer to 300 plus gross, still packed muscle in an era when insurance surcharges and emissions regulations were killing performance. Equipped with a 4-speed manual and traction lock differential, the Sprint became a stealth street fighter. Independent tests showed mid-14-second quarter miles, plenty fast enough to embarrass cars wearing the Shelby badge just a few years earlier. Production totaled fewer than 9,000 units, making Sprint editions far rarer than most late-era Shelbys. Today, the Sprint edition is remembered as a misunderstood Mustang. What seemed like a patriotic trim package was actually Ford's way of slipping real performance into a car most dismissed as show without go. Collectors now recognize its rarity, and properly optioned 351 CG Sprints command respect at auctions. The car embodies an era when Detroit still tried to outsmart the regulators and keep muscle alive, even if it meant disguising it behind star-spangled stripes. But the Sprint was only a prelude. Just 1 year later, the Mach 1 351 Cobra Jet would roar onto the scene, Ford's last gasp of true Mustang muscle before the decade turned soft, leaving fans to wonder if the Shelby killer had finally been tamed. Top 8. 1973 Mustang Mach 1341 Cobra Jet, Q-code. By 1973, the muscle car era was crumbling under the weight of insurance hikes, smog regulations, and the first whispers of the fuel crisis. Yet buried in Ford's lineup was one last defiant roar, the Mach 1 351 Cobra Jet, a Mustang that refused to go quietly, wearing muscle-like armor in a time of surrender. The 73 Mach 1 looked bigger, wider, and heavier than its predecessors. A long hood, recessed grille with sport lamps, and urethane front bumper gave it a more Lincoln-like presence than a lean racer. Stripes along the body, dual exhaust tips, and optional rear spoiler preserved its muscle identity. Inside, drivers found high-back knitted vinyl seats, a wood-grain-trimmed dash, and round gauges set deep into a sport cluster. Though more plush than earlier Bosses, the Mach 1 still offered a driver-focused cockpit, especially with the optional tachometer and center console. Here's the secret. Order the Q-code 351 Cobra Jet, and the Mach 1 transformed from boulevard cruiser into a legitimate performance car. The 351 CJ, rated at 266 net horsepower, was underrated real-world output set closer to 300 gross horsepower. Paired with a 4-speed manual and traction lock rear axle, the car could still sprint 0 to 60 in the mid-6-second range and clear the quarter mile in the mid-14s. While production of Mach 1s exceeded 35,000 in 1973, only a fraction were ordered with the Q-code Cobra Jet and 4-speed, making those cars the true Shelby killers in disguise. For buyers, the Mach 1 351 CJ was the last chance to taste genuine Mustang muscle before the malaise-era gutted performance. It carried the spirit of Shelbys into an era when most competitors were fading fast. Today, Q-Mode's 73 Mach 1s are valued far higher than their small block siblings, precisely because they represent the final stand of Ford performance before compromise. The car proved that even in decline, the Mustang could flash teeth sharp enough to bite. And so the curtain fell. The 1973 Mach 1 Cobra jet wasn't just the end of a model, it was the symbolic finale of the Shelby killer Mustangs. After this, the legend of raw horsepower would dim, leaving collectors to chase the ghosts of these disguised assassins. In the 1970s, the Mustang wasn't only battling emissions and regulations, it was quietly sharpening its knives against Shelby itself. Hidden inside Mach 1s, Bosses, and regional specials like the Twister, Ford planted engines that could destroy reputations at a stoplight. They weren't flashy, but they were lethal, true Shelby killers in disguise. Today they stand as proof that Mustang muscle was never about the badge alone, but the heart beating beneath the hood. Rare, raw, and unstoppable, these cars rewrote the rulebook. Which one do you think deserves the crown as the ultimate hidden Shelby assassin? This is Muscle Cars Revolution.